There are stories that you recommend to people because they are good and well made and important, but there are other stories, far fewer in number, that you recommend to people because they are windows into your soul, because they describe your existence clearer than mere words could, because they seem like they were made specifically for you and make you feel seen, uncomfortably and honestly seen.
I see you.
SuperMutant Magic Academy is the latter type of story for me. I recommend it not because I expect everyone to enjoy it, but because anyone who reads it will understand me infinitely better by doing so, for better or worse. It's so near to my heart that it feels revealing to talk about it, like reading someone my diary, something that should remain personal, secret, and unknown. Yet the intimate, personal feel of the book is precisely why I enjoyed it so much, because from the outset, Magic Academy was designed to be, quote, a diary of sorts for its author. Serialized from 2010 to 2015, the stupidly titled webcomic turned graphic novel has been described by author Jillian Tamaki as a mix between a diary and a sketchbook. It both offers a glimpse into her everyday thoughts, like a diary, and acts as a demonstration of her growth as a writer and illustrator over its 5 years of publication, much like a sketchbook. It's a mix between the long-form storytelling of webcomics like Homestuck and the episodic structure of gag comics like Sarah's Scribbles. The book definitely resembles the latter more, primarily using gags to tell its personal story. Even as the book expanded into a hefty graphic novel with a slightly more serialized narrative, Tamaki kept the stakes low, actively subverting grandiosity by reducing death, paranormal encounters, supernatural powers, and cosmic forces to these blasé, comically anticlimactic events. The focus is on the interior versus the exterior. The fantastical setting of the eponymous academy is simply there to explore the fascinating interior worlds of the people within it.
It's an intentionally stupid concept with an intentionally stupid name that I just wanted to use kind of as a sandbox to explore themes. And even though they're teenagers, a lot of times I think that they're 30-year-olds, which is when I, made the comic as well. So it was just an intentionally stupid concept to drape bigger things over.
Tamaki drapes the book in various bigger things: feminism, existentialism, sexuality, depression, death. But ultimately, it's a book about choice. The choice to confess your feelings to your best friend or not, the choice to go to school or skip class, the choice to do everything or nothing at all. Unlike a lot of media aimed at a younger audience, Tamaki doesn't use world-ending stakes or allegorical powers to convey her theme. Instead, once again borrowing from creators like Watterson, she uses the everyday lives of her characters to explore these ideas. Instead of using the extraordinary to talk about the ordinary, the book subverts the idea that there's a distinction between the two, because if everything is meaningless, the only thing that's important is what we place importance in. In the end, meaning is subjective.
Nothing matters.
Most characters in Magic Academy to some extent believe the nihilistic claim that nothing matters, a belief reinforced by Everlasting Boy's life of constant, meaningless pain, which is actually the first strip the book begins with. Each character adopts one of two broad responses to this idea: order or disorder. Most of the cast adopt an anarchistic fuck party murder mentality in response. Marcia, the novel's de facto protagonist, highlights this ideology best. She suggests that the only adequate response to the universe's seeming indifference to our existence is irreverence. Her defining character trait is a seeming inability to take anything seriously or at face value, which stands in stark contrast to her starry-eyed crush, Wendy. While Wendy spends hours baking a cake for a potluck, Marcia makes one in seconds with magic because heart is for suckers. Gemma sets up a bake sale for the Eco Club, so Marcia starts a rival bake sale with cheaper prices and more sugar because she's that petty. A student asks her to donate to a panda charity, and she points out the corruption of charity organizations as a justification for her not donating. While most of her peers are ecstatic to dress up and go to prom, she is vehemently opposed, stating in one of my favorite lines of the book that she doesn't observe state-sanctioned fun.
That's a bold statement.
She's almost made an art form out of rejecting the system. It's kind of her thing. Beneath that cold, defiant exterior, Marcia seems to be concealing a deeper insecurity and sense of alienation that drives her actions. It's clear in her coming out to Wendy and her conversation with Cheddar at the end of the book that Marcia isn't the best at communicating her emotions. To some degree, her dismissive persona is a way for her to conceal her social deficiencies. She can't connect with people, so she defaults to messing with them instead. While she has friends and people who enjoy her company, she definitely seems distant from her peers, evidenced by her decision to spend prom night alone in a cave listening to K-pop. In her slightly fumbled sports analogy at the end of the book, she expresses that she doesn't really know what she's doing. She feels as though she was thrust into some strange world with rules she doesn't understand. As a result, she carries a degree of resentment that manifests as a cynical, contrarian attitude. She's more concerned about feeling superior to others, about sounding right, rather than being right, and hates being put in her place or proven wrong. Except by Wendy, of course, who she seems to tease for sport. Her outward personality is a bit contrived, but it's not entirely false. When dealing with her chauvinistic male peers, her cold response seems appropriate and honest for a feminist like herself. But when Wendy is harassed by such men, and Marcia's initial response is to dismiss Wendy's understandable annoyance, it seems like the response is more pathological. As Robert Kirby said in his review of Magic Academy, Marcia's cynicism is premature. It's a defense mechanism she uses to deal with a world that seems pitted against her. It's as though she's defying the very idea of caring. The only logical response is irreverence, is to burn down your field of fucks. But as with many people who seem to give no fucks, Marcia, in fact, gives all of the fucks. She's genuinely enthusiastic about playing D&D, at least in the beginning, and she cares deeply for Wendy, who can quickly break down her facade and reveal a softer, more sensitive, yet still blunt and kind of rude interior. The cynicism is just her way to feel different and to exert some power in a system she feels encumbered by. Truly though, as Cheddar observes in the final pages of the book, she's not so different from your average misunderstood teen. Her crush on Wendy, the major subplot of the narrative, exemplifies how teenagery she is. Though she's annoyed at her peers' incessant fawning over Everlasting Boy, she herself is unabashed in her obsession with Wendy, which at times borders on creepy as she goes as far as to steal Wendy's hairbrush and peek up her skirt. She's really just your basic average girl who, like many introverted, angst-ridden teens, feel disconnected from everyone else. Tamaki has said she related most to Marcia's high school experience, connecting to that sense of isolation and separation not only from the popular crowds, but the weird kids as well. The lack of autonomy in high school was something that bothered Tamaki, as it does Marcia. Not being able to choose who to be around was a particular annoyance. Both Marcia and Tamaki seem to, on the whole, dislike people. Marcia's behavior is, as Tamaki described it, a matter of surviving. It's certainly not a perfect way to survive, and Tamaki even suggests at the end that it may be detrimental. Maybe I was too busy complaining about the food in the caf to realize these were the best years of my life, Marcia says, reflecting on her high school years. Ultimately though, Tamaki rejects the nostalgic idea that adolescence is the peak of existence, saying candidly, I'd rather be in my 30s. In contrast to Marcia, characters like Wendy and Gemma attempt to abide by their strong principles, which they are regularly lambasted for. Whether it's Gemma politely refusing to eat chili as a vegetarian, or Wendy trying to convince Marcia to recycle, or convince Gemma to read a note in her locker, which ends up just being an insult, the book teases these attempts to cling onto meaning or attempt to improve the world in some way. Though the book may be teasing, it's not invalidating their experience so much as it is critiquing their perspective for being slightly naive and impractical. In one strip, the ever well-intentioned Wendy drops 1,000 paper hearts from the roof of the academy on Valentine's Day to, quote, start a dialogue about random kindness and the potential for love. The response to her act of disruptive beauty ranges from indifference to confusion to outright contempt. The issue with her philosophy is assuming that everyone is approaching the world from her rose-tinted moralistic perspective, which can feel a bit tone-deaf coming from a privileged, conventionally attractive goody-two-shoes. As Trixie says in the book's climax, advice from Wendy is like a meal of cotton candy. It sounds good at the start, but eventually it'll leave you feeling a bit sick. Even Wendy occasionally fails to follow her own sugary philosophy, as shown when she initially refuses to sign a petition to reinstate animal dissection, only to concede when she's told the same petition will also lead to an espresso machine being installed in the cafeteria. Wendy highlights how contradictory we can be, how the values we construct for ourselves can be easily broken when they don't make us feel good. We want to be good people, but we also want to be happy people, and it's not always possible to be both. Sometimes you have to choose your battles and decide to bow out in favor of a comfortable status quo. When Marcia makes a dismissive remark, she's doing what's comfortable. When Wendy makes an optimistic feminist claim, she's doing what's comfortable. Both of their responses are self-serving attempts to find and hold on to meaning in an inherently meaningless universe. The book doesn't portray either viewpoint as inherently superior to the other. Both perspectives leave the characters equally as aimless, scared, and confused in the end. Both perspectives have their flaws. Marcia can be insensitive, rude, and self-absorbed, while Wendy can be a bit insular, tone-deaf, and excessively idealistic. But it's their choice. They're allowed to choose how to live their life and decide what would make them the happiest. Humans are unique from other animals in that we need a reason to do stuff. Most animals are perfectly content with mere existence, with eating, pooping, and making babies for the sake of it because their bodies tell them to. But humans, we foolish little homos, are too smart for our own good.
Sometimes my genius is... it's almost frightening.
We worry too much about the why. We don't merely want to exist, we want to live and live well and convince ourselves that we are somehow special and that we are good people and that despite what we may believe in our darkest moments, that we are valuable. So even though we do meaningless crap like every other species on the planet, we convince ourselves that on some level it is meaningful and deliberate and logical. But sometimes your base desire crashes against your intellectual structures, as Chris Randall commented in his commentary on Magic Academy. We humans are, to our core, still animals. Smart animals, but animals nonetheless. And like any animal, we have impulses and desires that clash against our veneer of intelligence. That conflict between youth and intellectualism, between our aspirations and simple human desires, is one of the core themes of the book. As Bill Watterson said, quote, I suspect that most of us get old without growing up, and that inside every adult, sometimes not very far inside, is a bratty kid who wants everything his own way. We may be the smartest species on the planet, but we're still dumb, pleasure-seeking animals that do what makes us feel good, even if it's bad for us.
Gasoline, slick and wet and super soft all over me. I want it, take me home.
In one of my favorite strips from the comic, Gemma questions why the resident art kid, Frances, smokes, a character trait that has defined her from her first appearance. Gemma goes into all the health risks of smoking and the immoral practices of big tobacco, attempting to appeal to Frances's logical brain and progressive, anti-establishment ideology. But Frances justifies her habit simply by saying, "It brings me pleasure, I'm afraid." Pleasure, as defined by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, is the superficial feeling of joy we get from fulfilling a biological need or societal expectation. So, for example, eating and having sex are biological experiences that make people feel good, and winning the lottery and going on vacation are social experiences that act as, quote, symbols of happiness. None of these things actually guarantee happiness, of course, but we often operate on the assumption that they do. Pleasure is immediate, sensorial, carnal, and superficial.
Synonyms.
Comparatively, enjoyment is the deeper, long-lasting satisfaction one gets from accomplishing something difficult, of making progress, learning, and gaining something immaterial yet enriching. It's soulful, long-lasting, and intellectual. A cigarette may satisfy a chain smoker for a few hours, but a good morning workout can leave you energized for a whole day. Enjoyment is better for you, but pleasure is more enticing and far easier to achieve. The key difference between the two is complexity. Pleasure is good simply because it feels good. Enjoyment is good because it provides a personal sense of accomplishment. That feeling you get after listening to a really good TED Talk, that feeling of mastering a skill you've practiced for years, that feeling of reading a really good book, that's enjoyment. Pleasure and enjoyment are kind of like that one Bo Burnham vine.
Is there anything better than pussy? Yes, a really good book.
Our desire for pleasure degrades any sort of moral or cognitive thinking, which is most apparent when it comes to love. Even the most nihilistic, cynical teenager will treat their love, or lust, as the most important thing in the world. As Tamaki said in one interview, wanting to be kissed is the most natural thing in the world. Love can supersede everything else.
That's the thing where it's just like everything else falls away and you're just like, you become a little bit of a dork, you know? You're just like, you feel kind of dumb. You're like a little puppy.
Can't stop talking about her to your friends.
Yeah.
I've discussed this aspect of Marcia's character, but Trixie, the air-headed dino girl of the Academy, is a more direct demonstration of this phenomenon. In a work filled with so many strong female characters, Trixie's boy-crazed personality seems almost out of place. While her other friends encourage her to focus on herself and ignore the misogynistic beauty standards of our male-dominated society, Trixie remains concerned with her appearance and getting a boyfriend throughout the entire book. And this isn't portrayed as a bad thing. She may not need a boy, but she certainly wants one. She wants to wear makeup and look cute and receive external validation for her beauty. She wants to appeal to the male gaze. Characters like Frances, Wendy, and Gemma seek to subvert and undermine these expectations placed on women, but Trixie leans into them because it makes her feel good. And Tamaki suggests that maybe that's okay. Maybe that mindset isn't incompatible with feminism. People want to be loved, and sometimes that means giving into unhealthy beauty standards or sexualizing yourself to appeal to the male gaze. And if that makes you happy, and you're doing it for your own benefit rather than someone else's, then maybe that's okay. It's her choice. Sure, it doesn't challenge the patriarchy and may indirectly perpetuate unhealthy notions of femininity, but Trevor could be considered the male equivalent of Trixie. Both are similarly dim-witted, highly emotional, impulsive, and highly sensitive children who just want to be your friend. Trevor has a fairly hedonistic philosophy. When there's a choice to give into an impulse and get an immediate rush of dopamine, Trevor usually takes it. He has Marcia's dismissiveness but lacks the wit that makes her remarks have weight, so he comes across as outright mocking rather than just blunt. He also has the rebelliousness of Frances, but instead of conveying some artistic, anti-authoritarian message, his rebellion is aimless and done just for the sake of it. He doesn't piss in a trash can to convey a message, he just does it because he wants to. He's not bad, he just likes doing bad things. More than anyone else in the comic, he is just desperate to fit in and be loved. That's why he seems to enjoy prom more than any other central character. It's an environment where it's easy to mingle, to blend in, and enjoy the company of others. He's sort of a sad reflection of Marcia in this way. Like her, he's alienated from his peers, but he's way more desperate for attention and immature than Marcia. Tamaki described Trevor as the only character in the book who was outright sad in comparison to the others who simply have shades of melancholy. In the original webcomic, there was a minor subplot of Trevor having an abusive father, which was luckily cut from the final book, as though Tamaki realized that that would be too depressing for an ostensibly haha funny book. On the opposite end of the spectrum from Trevor is Cheddar, one of, if not the most important character in the narrative. He has this hyper-logical, cold, detached persona that's similar to Marcia's, albeit far tougher to crack. Whether he's observing the perfectly constructed form of his teammate's ass or bluntly explaining why he isn't passing to female players, Cheddar frequently uses logic like a blunt force weapon. But logic, more often than not, is simply an objective tool we use to justify our subjective beliefs. Cheddar uses his intellect to rationalize his aversion to authority. Much like Trevor, he doesn't concern himself with being a great student. He just wants to be as happy as he can, to, quote, suck the marrow out of his freedom while he's still young. There's a genuine logical argument within that statement, but emotion is the main driving factor behind his philosophy. Through Cheddar, Tamaki wonderfully subverts the typical notion of the hedonistic, self-destructive, rebellious jock by having Cheddar be a pretty down-to-earth, chill guy. It's as though he's also rebelling against the stereotype of the meathead jock. His idea of a good time is playing guitar and having a cold one with the boys, or sitting out on the bench and enjoying a cig with his friend. In comparison to Trevor, his masculinity is extremely healthy, progressive even. And despite being generally quite lazy, he does apply for a job interview in one strip, showing that he at least has some motivation to make something out of his life. His primary issue is being told what to do. It's revealed offhandedly in one of the last panels of the book that Cheddar has received premonitions about an upcoming apocalypse, recontextualizing all his prior actions in the book. He's so obsessed with the idea of living life the way you want, following your dreams, and making the best of your life now, because he's convinced that he won't have much of a life in the future, at least not one that he can control. And no fate could be worse than living a predetermined life that someone else wrote for you. Trevor, Francis, Marcia, even Wendy and Gemma get some sense of satisfaction knowing they have a choice, the ability to control their fate. Even within the restrictions of the school system, there's the ability to rebel, to break away. There's a special kind of heaven in finding something you love and choosing to pursue that. But there's also a special kind of hell in being forced into doing something, in having your life's purpose preordained.
Well, perhaps I'm not your chosen one. You'll have to look around for someone far more danger-prone and blindly duty-bound. So thank you, but really no thank you to your batshit prophecy. And please make it some other hero's journey.
There's a phenomenon in human psychology called the overjustification effect. It states that if someone enjoys doing something for fun, giving them an incentive to do that activity can actually decrease their motivation. Giving someone an external reward actually causes their motivation to change from intrinsic or internal to extrinsic or external. A similar idea is presented in Magic Academy. Tamaki suggests that being told to do something makes you less inclined to do it, even if that something sounds cool, like being told you are the chosen one. Though the characters desperately search for meaning, they don't want to be handed a purpose, they want to find it. This is an aspect of the characters that's directly reflective of Tamaki herself.
I've always been this type of person that was slightly contrarian and didn't like people telling me what to do. For example, being an artist. From my kindergarten teacher said, "You're going to be an artist one day." And I was like, "Don't tell me what to do." So I really denied that for a long time, saying, "Don't tell me. I can do other things."
In the book, high school as a whole is used as a metaphor for predetermination. Therefore, to reject school is to also reject fate and exercise your free will. The narrative frames rebellion as inevitable and helpful, even in many cases, for the kids. Magic Academy seems to operate on the philosophy of Jean-Paul Sartre, who believed that humans were inherently free, that we can, at any point, change the course of our lives of our own free will. To believe that you do not have free will is to live in bad faith, according to Sartre. Nothing is stopping you from plunging a fork into your eye or drinking antifreeze or ordering pizza, except you. You are wonderfully and terrifyingly free. To not acknowledge your freedom will ultimately do you more harm than good. So it's exceptionally powerful that Cheddar, who has been the most opposed to this idea of destiny, decides to accept the prophecy at the end of the book rather than run away from it. Yet the book, as should be expected, subverts this expectation. The prophecy is revealed to be at best premature, at worst apocryphal. Either way, Cheddar and Marcia are able to continue, to leave high school and write their own futures. Ultimately, the book concludes that we can choose, but Cheddar's dejected expression indicates that this is not an entirely positive revelation.
It seemed for a second in that ending scene like maybe those characters wanted their superhero destiny.
Right. Well, it's a little flattering to say that you are
the chosen one.
The chosen one that has to save the universe. Who wouldn't sort of in deep down maybe think that was cool?
Jean-Paul Sartre also believed that freedom came with a caveat, that humanity was both blessed and burdened with freedom. He used the analogy of a gambler to highlight this.
Imagine a gambler, a man who goes out to the casino every day and spends all his money with little to no reward. Eventually, he comes to realize that his gambling addiction is ruining his life and his family, so he resolves to never gamble again. The next day, he's walking past the casino and thinks to himself, what's stopping me from going in, breaking my resolution, and sinking back into that life? And Sartre would say, the answer is nothing. There is nothing standing in the way of the gambler resuming his bad choices. He is completely and terrifyingly free. It's the same as when you're standing atop a tall building or cliff. Many feel fear at seeing the distance between themselves and the ground. They're understandably scared of falling to an early death. However, to Sartre, what those people fear is not the idea that they could fall, but the idea that they could jump.
He described the fear or burden of freedom as anguish, an apprehension of oneself, the feeling that comes from realizing you are terrifyingly free. Having your life mapped out is to some degree comforting. It's safe in its clarity. Wendy, leading up to prom, expresses anxiety at all of the options available to her after high school. The amount of freedom is overwhelming. It causes anguish. Marcia, in the end, recognizes this as well, feeling overwhelmed by the enormity of her choices, choosing to ignore it while she still can, like Cheddar. The book concludes rather abruptly from there. Marcia finally admits her feelings to Wendy, but we never see the consequences that this has on their relationship, or exactly how their lives will be after high school. There's an infuriatingly brief epilogue that gives one-sentence blurbs about the characters' lives after the ending. For a book that has been all about illustrating the tiny details of everyday life, it feels like a betrayal for the epilogue to be so curt. But perhaps Tamaki's choice to leave their futures so uncertain is her way of allowing them ultimate freedom. Their futures remain unwritten, left to speculation. Ultimately, they get to choose where they go and what they do. Not even the author is sure what that'll look like. It's entirely up to speculation. For a fictional character, that's the closest thing to freedom they can get. The final piece of wisdom I got from the book is this. You're not special, but that doesn't mean you don't matter. You do matter, and every emotion you've felt, every stupid thought you've had, every discovery you've made, every dumb thing you've done, and every choice you've made is valuable. But it's also really silly, and sometimes it's good to step back a moment and recognize how ridiculous we can all be sometimes. We're all just making the best out of what we've got. The book simply seeks to illustrate that fact and demonstrate the downsides that come with having freedom. Yet, even if it's not perfect, it's better than the alternative. As the saying goes, live free or die. Death is not the worst of evils.
I'll be back in a month with a new bucket of trash. Later!